A Wyoming rancher who spent 15 years avoiding people stumbles across something impossible in the frozen wilderness. A half-dead woman tied to a fence post with newborn twins crying beside her. Someone left them there to freeze. Someone wanted them erased. What Coulter Vance finds that morning drags him into a war against wealth, power, and men who believe they own other people's lives. This is a story about survival, justice, and what happens when a broken man decides no one will ever hurt them again. If you stay until the end, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The fence post had snapped clean through. Coulter Vance stood in snow up to his knees, breath fogging in the air, staring at the broken wood like it had personally offended him. 15 years he'd lived on this mountain, 15 years keeping everything standing, and now this. The wire sagged between the posts, useless. He'd have to replace the whole section before nightfall, or risk losing cattle to the ravine below. He pulled his gloves tighter and started toward the toolbox strapped to his horse when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Coulter froze. The wind had died down an hour ago, leaving the kind of silence that pressed against your ears. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest town, silence was the only constant. He knew every sound these mountains made. The crack of ice on branches, the distant rumble of shifting snow, the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. This wasn't any of those. It came again. High-pitched, desperate, a baby crying. Coulter's jaw tightened. He wasn't a man prone to imagination, spent too many winters alone for that. But the sound was unmistakable, cutting through the cold air like something out of a fever dream. He moved toward it, boots crunching through the crust of snow, one hand instinctively dropping to the rifle slung across his back. The crying grew louder. Then he heard a second voice join the first. Two babies, their wails overlapping in a rhythm that made his chest constrict. What the hell was a baby doing out here? He rounded a cluster of pine trees and stopped dead. 20 feet ahead, slumped against the base of a massive boulder, was a woman. Her dress was torn, dark fabric barely visible beneath a dusting of snow. Her hands were bound behind her back with rope, arms wrenched at an angle that looked wrong even from a distance. She wasn't moving. Beside her, wrapped in nothing but thin blankets that had come half undone, were two infants. Their faces were red from screaming, tiny fists flailing against the cold. Coulter's mind went blank for a second. Then training kicked in, the kind you don't forget even after 15 years of isolation. He closed the distance fast, dropping to one knee beside the woman. Her lips were blue, ice clung to her hair. He pressed two fingers against her neck and felt a pulse, faint and unsteady. Jesus Christ, he muttered. The babies kept crying. He looked around, scanning the tree line, the ridge above, anywhere someone might be watching. Nothing. Just wind-carved drifts and skeletal branches. Whoever had done this was long gone. Coulter pulled his knife and cut the rope binding the woman's wrists. Her arms fell forward limply. He shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, then scooped up the first baby. A girl, he guessed, though it was hard to tell through all the blankets. She screamed louder the second he touched her. I know, he said quietly. I know. He tucked her inside his shirt against his chest, then grabbed the second baby and did the same. They were so small. Couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. How long had they been out here? The woman stirred, eyelids fluttering. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Don't talk, Coulter said. Save your strength. Her eyes opened. Dark brown, unfocused, filled with something that looked like terror. She tried to pull away from him. I'm not going to hurt you, he said, keeping his voice level. Whoever left you here is gone. I'm taking you somewhere warm. She stared at him for a long moment. Then her eyes rolled back and she went limp again. Coulter cursed under his breath. He couldn't carry all three of them and lead the horse at the same time. He'd have to make a choice. He looked at the woman, then at the babies squirming against his chest. They were still crying, but quieter now, warming up. He made his decision. Coulter lifted the woman as gently as he could, draping her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. She weighed almost nothing. He straightened, feeling the strain in his back, and started toward his horse. The babies protested every step, their cries muffled against his ribs. Almost there, he said, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to them or himself. The ride back to the cabin took an hour. Longest hour of his life, the woman didn't wake up. The babies cried themselves into exhausted silence. Coulter's arms burned from holding everything together, and by the time his cabin came into view through the trees, his hands were shaking. He kicked the door open and carried them inside. The cabin wasn't much. One large room with a wood stove, a bed in the corner, a table and 2 chairs. Coulter had built it himself after his parents died, back when he still thought he might have a future worth living. Now it was just a place to sleep between work. He laid the woman on the bed and pulled the blankets up to her chin. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Frostbite on her fingers, maybe her toes. He'd deal with that later. The babies started crying again. Coulter stood there, staring down at them, and realized he had no idea what to do. He'd never held a baby before in his life. "All right," he said. "All right." He found a basket near the stove and lined it with every spare blanket he owned, then laid the babies inside side by side. They looked up at him with wide, unfocused eyes. One of them, the smaller one, had stopped crying and was just staring, like she was trying to figure out if he was dangerous. "You're safe now," Coulter said quietly. The baby blinked. He turned back to the woman. Her dress was soaked through, clinging to her skin. If he didn't get her out of those clothes, she'd freeze to death right there in his bed. Coulter hesitated, then grabbed a knife and carefully cut the fabric away, keeping his eyes on his work. He'd seen plenty of injured people over the years. Ranch accidents, bar fights, one bad winter where half the town came down with fever. This wasn't different, except it was, because someone had tied this woman up and left her to die. Coulter wrapped her in dry blankets and checked her pulse again. Stronger now. That was good. He built up the fire until the cabin felt like a furnace, then collapsed into one of the chairs and let his head fall back against the wall. His hands were still shaking. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. Snow began to fall, thick and heavy. If he'd checked the fence line an hour later, he wouldn't have heard the crying. The storm would have buried them. Coulter closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. He didn't believe in miracles. Didn't believe in much of anything anymore. But sitting there in the heat of his cabin, listening to the crackling fire and the soft breathing of 3 people who should have been dead, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted. Like a door he'd locked 15 years ago had cracked open, and now he didn't know how to close it. One of the babies started crying again. Coulter opened his eyes and looked at the basket. The smaller one was awake, her face scrunched up in distress. He didn't know what she needed. Food, probably. Or a clean diaper. Or just someone to hold her. He stood up and walked over, leaning down to peer at her. She stopped crying and stared at him with those unfocused eyes. "What do you want?" he asked. She didn't answer. Coulter sighed and picked her up, holding her awkwardly against his chest. She was warm now, her tiny body radiating heat through the blanket. She made a small sound, not a cry, just a noise, and turned her face toward him like she was trying to burrow closer. Something in Coulter's chest tightened. He sat back down, cradling the baby in one arm, and stared into the fire. The other baby had fallen asleep. The woman was still unconscious. The storm outside was getting worse. And Coulter Vance, who had spent 15 years avoiding people, who had built his entire life around being alone, realized he had no idea what happened next. The woman woke up 2 days later. Coulter was outside chopping wood when he heard her scream. He dropped the axe and ran inside, expecting the worst. Instead, he found her sitting upright in bed, eyes wild, clutching the blankets like they were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. "Where are they?" she gasped. "Where are my daughters?" Coulter held up both hands. "They're fine. They're right there." He pointed to the basket near the stove. Both babies were awake, staring at the ceiling with that vacant newborn expression. The woman's gaze snapped to them, and something in her face crumpled. She tried to stand, swayed, and collapsed back onto the bed. "Don't," Coulter said. "You've been out for 2 days. Your body needs time." "I have to. They're fed. They're warm. They're safe." He crossed his arms. "You try to walk right now. You'll fall on your face, and I'll have to pick you up again." The woman stared at him, breathing hard. Then her eyes filled with tears. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Coulter Vance, this is my cabin. I found you out by the fence line." He paused. "Someone tied you up and left you there." Her face went pale. You know?" Hard to miss. She looked down at her hands. The rope burns on her wrists were starting to scab over, dark red lines cutting across her skin. Her fingers were bandaged where the frostbite had been worst. They wanted, she said quietly. Coulter didn't respond. He'd figured as much. My name is Naomi, she continued, still staring at her hands. Naomi Hale. My husband died 3 months ago. His family... She stopped, jaw tightening. His family didn't want me anymore. So they tried to kill you. They said I failed. Her voice was hollow. I gave him daughters instead of a son. That made me worthless. Coulter felt something cold settle in his gut. They tied up a woman and 2 babies and left them to freeze because you didn't have a boy. Yes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Coulter said, You're staying here until you're strong enough to travel. After that, you do whatever you want. But no one's dragging you out of this cabin unless you ask me to. Naomi looked up at him, eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. Why? Why what? Why help me? You don't know me. Coulter shrugged. Doesn't matter. It matters to me. He didn't have a good answer for that. Truth was, he didn't know why he cared. 15 years he'd lived on this mountain, ignoring everyone, keeping his head down. He could have left her out there. Could have ridden past that fence post and never looked back. But he hadn't. I heard your daughter's crying, he said finally. That's reason enough. Naomi held his gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. She looked toward the basket again, and this time she managed to push herself upright and swing her legs over the side of the bed. Coulter moved to help, but she waved him off. I can do it, she said. She took 3 shaky steps and collapsed to her knees beside the basket. The babies stared up at her, and Naomi let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She reached down and touched their faces, running her fingers over their cheeks like she couldn't believe they were real. They're alive, she whispered. You kept them alive. Coulter looked away. I didn't do much. You saved us. He didn't respond to that. Naomi lifted one of the babies, the smaller one, the one who'd stared at him that first night, and held her close. The baby made a small cooing sound. Naomi closed her eyes and pressed her face against the top of the baby's head. This is Clara, she said, and that's Emma. Good names, Coulter said. Naomi opened her eyes and looked at him over the baby's head. Thank you, she said quietly. I don't know what you expect in return, but I don't expect anything. Everyone expects something. I'm not everyone. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded again. I can see that. The days started to blur together. Naomi recovered slowly. Her strength came back in pieces. First enough to hold the babies, then enough to stand without swaying, then enough to walk from the bed to the table without needing to sit down halfway through. Coulter watched her progress with the same detached attention he gave everything else, but he couldn't ignore the way his cabin had started to feel different. It was louder, for one thing. Babies cried at all hours. Naomi sang to them when they wouldn't settle, soft melodies Coulter didn't recognize. She talked to them constantly, narrating every little thing she did. Now we're going to change your diaper, yes we are, and then we'll see if you're hungry, won't we? Coulter found it deeply unsettling. He'd lived in silence for so long that noise felt like an intrusion. But at the same time, when the cabin went quiet, when Naomi fell asleep and the babies were finally settled, he found himself missing it. That was worse. One evening, about a week after Naomi woke up, she joined him at the table for dinner. Coulter had made stew, the same thing he made every winter because it was easy and lasted for days. Naomi ate slowly, like she was still getting used to having an appetite. Can I ask you something? She said after a while. Coulter didn't look up from his bowl. Sure. Why do you live out here alone? He paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. That's a personal question. I know. He set the spoon down. My parents died 15 years ago. House fire. I was supposed to be home that night, but I wasn't. I was out drinking with friends, acting like I had all the time in the world. He stared at the table. By the time I got back, there was nothing left but ash. Naomi's expression softened. That wasn't your fault. People kept saying that. Didn't make it true. So you came out here. So I came out here. He picked up his spoon again. Seemed easier than staying in town, pretending everything was fine. And now? Now I don't pretend anything. Naomi was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Do you regret finding us? Coulter looked at her. She was watching him carefully, like his answer mattered more than she wanted to admit. No, he said finally. Even though we've made your life harder, you haven't. Coulter, there are 2 screaming babies in your cabin. Your life is objectively harder. He almost smiled. Maybe, but it's not worse. Naomi blinked, caught off guard. Then something shifted in her expression. Something softer, more open. Thank you, she said quietly. Coulter nodded and went back to his stew. The trouble started 3 weeks later. Coulter was outside splitting wood when he saw the riders coming up the path. 2 men on horseback, moving slow and deliberate. He set down the axe and wiped his hands on his pants, watching them approach. They stopped about 20 feet from the cabin. The first man was older, maybe 50, with a thick beard and a marshal's badge pinned to his coat. The second was younger, sharper looking, dressed too well for the mountains. You Coulter Vance? The marshal asked. I am. The marshal nodded. Got a report that you might have someone staying with you. Woman named Naomi Hale. Coulter's jaw tightened. Who's asking? The younger man leaned forward in his saddle. I am. My name is Richard Hale. Naomi is my brother's widow. Her family is very concerned about her safety. Her family? Coulter repeated slowly. Yes. We've been searching for her since she disappeared. We heard rumors that someone found her out near the ridge. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. We're very grateful, of course. We'd like to bring her home. She's not going anywhere. The marshal frowned. Mr. Vance, if Mrs. Hale is here, we need to see her. Make sure she's all right. She's fine. I'm sure she is, but the cabin door opened and Naomi stepped out onto the porch. She was holding Clara in her arms, Emma bundled against her chest in a sling Coulter had rigged up from spare cloth. She looked at Richard, and her entire body went rigid. No, she said. Richard's expression hardened. Naomi, we've been looking everywhere for you. I said no. You don't have a choice. I do. Naomi's voice shook, but she didn't back down. I know what you did. You left me out there to die. You tied me up and walked away, and you expected the cold to finish what you started. The marshal's eyes narrowed. Is that true? Of course not, Richard said smoothly. She's confused, traumatized. My brother's death affected her deeply, and I'm not confused. Naomi took a step forward. You wanted me dead because I didn't give your brother a son. You said I was worthless. You said my daughters were worthless. That's a serious accusation, the marshal said slowly. It's the truth. Richard's smile vanished. Naomi, you're being hysterical. Come home with us, and we'll get you the help you need. I'm not going anywhere with you. You don't have any money. You don't have any family. Where exactly do you think you're going to go? She's staying here, Coulter said. Richard turned to him, eyes cold. This doesn't concern you. She's on my land. That makes it my concern. You're harboring another man's wife. I'm harboring a woman who was left to freeze to death. There's a difference. The marshal held up a hand. All right, everyone calm down. He looked at Naomi. Mrs. Hale, do you want to go with them? No. Are you staying here of your own free will? Yes? The marshal nodded slowly. Then there's nothing more to discuss. Richard's face flushed red. She's not in her right mind. She answered the question, the marshal interrupted. If you've got proof she's incapable of making decisions, bring it to a judge. Otherwise, she stays where she wants. For a long moment, Richard just stared at them. Then he pulled his horse around and dug his heels in, riding back down the path without another word. The marshal watched him go, then tipped his hat to Naomi. Ma'am, he said, and followed. Coulter waited until they were out of sight before turning to Naomi. She was still standing on the porch, holding both babies, her face pale. That was brave, he said. That was stupid. Her voice cracked. They're not going to let this go. I know. They'll come back. They'll bring more men. Naomi. Coulter climbed the steps and stood in front of her. I told you before. No one's dragging you out of this cabin unless you ask me to. She looked up at him, eyes wide and frightened. Why are you doing this? Because it's right. That's not a good enough reason. Coulter held her gaze. It's the only one I've got. Naomi stared at him for a minute. Then, slowly, she nodded. "All right," she whispered. "All right." Coulter turned and looked down the path where the riders had disappeared. The wind was picking up again, carrying the smell of snow. The storm was coming, and Coulter Vance, who had spent 15 years running from everything, realized he wasn't running anymore. The riders didn't come back that day, or the next. But their absence felt more like a threat than a relief. Coulter spent those first few days after the confrontation doing what he always did, fixing fence lines, checking the cattle, chopping enough wood to last through the next storm. But now he carried his rifle everywhere, and he found himself scanning the tree line more than he looked at the work in front of him. Naomi noticed. "You're expecting them," she said one morning while he was loading supplies onto his horse. "I'm being careful." "That's not an answer." Coulter tightened the last strap and turned to face her. She was standing in the doorway with Emma on her hip, Clara asleep in the sling across her chest. The babies had gained weight in the weeks since he'd found them. Their faces had filled out, their cries had gotten stronger. Naomi looked better too. Color back in her cheeks, steadier on her feet. But there was something new in her eyes now, something harder. "They're going to come back," Coulter said. "Men like Richard Hale don't let things go." "I know. So we prepare." "And then what? We fight them off every time they show up? For how long?" Coulter didn't have an answer for that. Naomi shifted Emma to her other hip. "Maybe I should just go." "Go where?" "Anywhere. Another town, another territory. Somewhere they won't find me." "They'll find you." Coulter's voice was flat. "Men with that kind of money always do." "Then what am I supposed to do?" "You stay here. You let me worry about them." Naomi stared at him. "Why do you keep doing this?" "Doing what?" "Protecting me. You don't owe me anything." "I know." "Then why?" Coulter looked at her for a long moment. The truth was, he didn't have a clean answer. It wasn't chivalry. It wasn't obligation. It was something messier than that, something he couldn't put into words even if he tried. "Because I can," he said finally. Naomi's expression softened. "That's not a reason. It's the only one I've got." She smiled, just a little. It was the first time he'd seen her smile since the day he found her. "You keep saying that," she said. "It keeps being true." Emma started fussing, and Naomi bounced her gently. "We should talk about what happens if they do come back. What the plan is. The plan is you stay inside, lock the door, don't open it unless I tell you to. And you? I handle it." "Coulter? Naomi." He took a step closer. "I'm not letting them take you. I don't care how many men they bring or what kind of badge they're carrying. You understand?" She held his gaze, searching his face for something. Then she nodded slowly. "I understand," she said quietly. Coulter climbed onto his horse and rode out to check the northern pasture, but he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. 3 days later, the Hale family made their move. It didn't start with riders or threats. It started with rumors. Coulter heard about it from a rancher named Tom Brewster, whose land bordered his to the east. Tom rode up one afternoon looking uncomfortable, his hat pulled low against the wind. "Got something you should know," Tom said without preamble. Coulter set down the post he'd been hammering into the ground. "What is it?" "There's talk in town about you and that woman." "What kind of talk?" "The bad kind." Tom shifted in his saddle. "People saying you kidnapped her, that you're keeping her here against her will." Coulter's jaw tightened. "That's a lie." "I know it is, but the Hale family's been spreading it around and people are listening. They're saying Naomi's husband died and you took advantage, that you lured her out here and now she's too scared to leave. She came here half frozen. I saved her life." "I believe you, but the marshal's starting to ask questions, and if enough people make noise, he's going to have to do something about it." Coulter looked toward the cabin. Naomi was inside with the babies, probably unaware that her reputation was being shredded in every saloon and general store between here and town. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Bad enough that people are taking sides. Some folks think you're a hero. Others think you're a criminal." Tom paused. "And the Hale family's got enough money to make sure the second group gets louder. What do they want? What they've always wanted? To get rid of Naomi and those babies. If they can't do it themselves, they'll let the law do it for them." Coulter exhaled slowly. "Thanks for the warning." Tom nodded and turned his horse around, then stopped. For what it's worth, I don't believe a word of it. You're a good man, Coulter. Just be careful. I will. But as Tom rode away, Coulter realized being careful wasn't going to be enough. That night, he told Naomi what Tom had said. She took it better than he expected. She sat at the table with Clara in her arms, listening without interrupting, her face unreadable. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "They're trying to destroy me," she said finally. "They're trying to isolate you, make you look like a victim so they can swoop in and play the heroes. It's working. Not with everyone. With enough people." Naomi looked down at Clara. "If the marshal arrests you, I don't know what I'll do. He's not going to arrest me. You don't know that. I know I'm not letting it get that far." Naomi looked up at him. "What are you planning?" "I'm going into town tomorrow. I'm going to tell people the truth. They won't believe you. Some of them will. And the ones who don't?" Coulter met her gaze. "Then we deal with them." Naomi held his eyes for a moment, then nodded. "I'm coming with you." "No. Coulter, it's not safe. It's never going to be safe. But if we're going to fight this, I need to be there. I need to tell people what really happened. You don't have to do that." "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm. "This is my fight as much as yours. Maybe more." Coulter wanted to argue, but he could see from the set of her jaw that it wouldn't do any good. Naomi had made up her mind. "All right," he said, "but we do it my way." "Fine." They left at dawn the next morning. The ride to town took 3 hours, and they didn't talk much along the way. Naomi carried both babies in the sling Coulter had made, their small faces peeking out from the layers of fabric. It was too cold to have them out like this, but there was no one to leave them with, and Naomi refused to let them out of her sight. Coulter didn't blame her. The town of Ridgeway sat in a valley between two mountains, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a single main street. It wasn't much. A general store, a saloon, a marshal's office, a church at the far end. Maybe 200 people lived there year-round, more when the ranchers came in for supplies. Coulter hadn't been here in over a year. He'd forgotten how small it felt, how the buildings seemed to lean in too close. They tied up the horses outside the general store, and Coulter helped Naomi down from the saddle. She adjusted the babies and straightened her shoulders. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said, "but let's go anyway." The store was crowded. A dozen people milled around the aisles, picking through canned goods and bolts of fabric. Conversation stopped the moment Coulter and Naomi walked in. Every head turned. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. Then a woman near the back whispered something to the man beside her, and the noise started up again, quieter now, laced with tension. Coulter ignored it. He walked to the counter where the shopkeeper, a man named Henry Walsh, was pretending to organize receipts. "Henry?" Coulter said. Henry looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "Coulter, haven't seen you in a while." "Been busy." Henry's gaze flicked to Naomi, then to the babies. "I heard." "I'm sure you have. That's why we're here." Henry set down the receipts. "Look, Coulter, I don't want any trouble." "Then don't cause any. We came to buy supplies and set the record straight." "The record?" "The lies the Hale family's been spreading." Henry shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Naomi stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "You've heard the rumors. That Coulter kidnapped me, that he's keeping me prisoner, that I'm too scared to leave." Henry didn't respond. "None of it's true," Naomi continued. "Coulter saved my life. The Hale family tried to kill me and my daughters. They tied me up and left me in the mountains to freeze to death. If Coulter hadn't found me, we'd be dead." A woman near the fabric aisle gasped. Henry's face went pale. That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth. Do you have proof?" Naomi pulled back her sleeves, revealing the rope scars still visible on her wrists. The store went dead silent. "This is my proof," she said. "And if you don't believe me, ask the marshal. He saw these the day Richard Hale came to drag me back." Henry stared at the scars, his jaw working. "The Hales are saying you're confused, that your husband's death made you—" "I'm not confused." Naomi's voice didn't waver. "I know exactly what happened, and if anyone in this town wants to hear the truth, I'll tell them. But I'm not going to stand here and let people call me a liar." For a long moment, no one moved. Then an older at the door spoke up. "I believe her." Everyone turned. The woman stepped forward, her cane tapping against the wooden floor. Her name was Margaret Rain, and she'd lived in Ridgeway longer than anyone. People respected her. "I've known the Hale family for years," Margaret said. "They're the kind of people who think money makes them better than everyone else. If they decided this girl was worthless, they'd do exactly what she's saying." "That's speculation," Henry said weakly. "It's experience." Margaret looked at Naomi. "What's your name, dear?" "Naomi." "Naomi, if you say Coulter Vance saved your life, I believe you. That man hasn't set foot in this town in over a year, and the only reason he'd come back now is if he had a damn good reason." Coulter felt something loosen in his chest. "Thank you," Naomi said quietly. Margaret nodded. "Don't thank me yet. The Hales have a lot of friends. This isn't over." "I know. But you've got friends, too. More than you think." Henry cleared his throat. "All right, if we're done with the theatrics, what do you need?" Coulter gave him a list. Henry filled the order without another word, and when Coulter paid, the shopkeeper wouldn't meet his eyes. They walked out of the store into the cold afternoon air, and Coulter could feel the weight of every stare following them. "That went better than I expected," Naomi said. "It's a start." But as they loaded the supplies onto the horses, Coulter saw a familiar figure standing outside the saloon across the street. Richard Hale. He wasn't alone. 3 men stood with him, all of them armed. Richard's eyes were locked on Naomi, his expression cold and calculating. "Get on the horse," Coulter said quietly. "Coulter, now." Naomi didn't argue. She climbed into the saddle, and Coulter handed her the reins. Then he turned to face Richard. The 2 men stared at each other across the street. Neither moved. The tension stretched thin, like a wire about to snap. Then Richard smiled. "You can't protect her forever, Vance," he called out. "I can try. You're just one man. One's enough." Richard's smile widened. "We'll see." He turned and walked back into the saloon, his men following. Coulter stood there for another moment, then climbed onto his horse and rode out of town without looking back. Naomi was quiet the whole way home. When they finally reached the cabin, she dismounted and handed him the reins. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For standing with me. For not walking away." Coulter looked at her. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the snow. Naomi's face was lit in shades of gold and amber, and for the first time since he'd found her, she looked like someone who wasn't just surviving. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Naomi held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Neither am I." The next 2 weeks passed in uneasy calm. Coulter went back to his work, Naomi took care of the babies, and the world outside the cabin continued to spin. But the tension never left. It sat in the back of Coulter's mind like a weight he couldn't shake. Then one night, Naomi asked him a question he wasn't expecting. "What do you want from life?" They were sitting at the table after dinner. The babies were asleep in the basket near the fire, their breathing soft and rhythmic. Coulter had been staring into his cup of coffee, half lost in thought. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean, what do you want? When all of this is over, if it's ever over, what do you see for yourself?" Coulter frowned. "I don't think about it." "Why not?" "Because it doesn't matter. It matters to me." He looked up at her. She was watching him carefully, her hands wrapped around her own cup. "Why?" he asked. "Because you've done so much for me, and I don't know what you're getting out of it. I don't know what you want." Coulter was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I don't want anything. Everyone wants something. I spent 15 years convincing myself I didn't need people, that being alone was easier, and then I found you and your daughters, and now—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I don't know what I want. I just know I'm not going back to the way things were." Naomi's expression softened. "Would it be so bad? Going back?" "Yeah," Coulter said quietly. "It would." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. The touch was light, tentative, but it sent a jolt through him. "I'm glad you found us," she said. Coulter looked down at her hand. He couldn't remember the last time someone had touched him like that. Not out of necessity, but out of something else. Something warmer. "Me too," he said. They sat like that for a while. not speaking, just existing in the same space. And for the first time in 15 years, Coulter didn't feel alone. The peace shattered 3 days later. Coulter was out back splitting wood when he heard the horses. He set down the axe and wiped his hands, already knowing who it was before he saw them. 8 riders this time. The marshal was at the front, his face grim. Richard Hale rode beside him, along with 2 other men Coulter didn't recognize. The rest were hired guns, their rifles slung across their saddles like promises. Coulter walked around to the front of the cabin and stood on the porch. Naomi came to the door behind him, one baby in her arms, the other in the sling. "Stay inside," Coulter said without turning around. "No." "Naomi, I'm not hiding." The rider stopped in front of the cabin. The marshal dismounted, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "Coulter Vance," he said, "I've got a warrant for your arrest." "On what charge?" "Unlawful detainment, obstruction of justice, interference with family matters." "That's bullshit, and you know it." "I don't make the laws. I just enforce them." Richard smiled from his saddle. "This has gone on long enough, Vance. Naomi belongs with her family." "I'm not her family," Naomi said, stepping forward. "You tried to kill me." "You keep saying that, but there's no proof." "The scars on my wrists aren't proof?" "They're proof you were injured, not proof we had anything to do with it." "That's a lie." Richard's expression hardened. "Marshal, are you going to arrest him or not?" The marshal looked at Coulter, then at Naomi. "Mrs. Hale, do you want to press charges against Mr. Vance?" "No." "Then there's no case." Richard's face flushed red. "She's not thinking clearly." She answered the question. The marshal turned back to Coulter. "But the warrant still stands. There are people who filed complaints, and I've got to follow through." "What people?" Coulter asked. "Citizens concerned about Mrs. Hale's welfare." "Citizens paid by the Hale family." The marshal didn't deny it. Coulter looked at the men behind the marshal. They weren't lawmen. They were hired muscle, and every one of them had their hand near a weapon. This wasn't about justice. It was about control. "I'm not going with you," Coulter said. The marshal's jaw tightened. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You brought 8 men to arrest 1 rancher. You've already made it hard." "Coulter, I'm not leaving her." "Then I'll have to take you by force." Coulter's hand moved toward his rifle, leaning against the porch rail. The hired guns tensed, their own weapons shifting. "Stop," Naomi said sharply. Everyone froze. Naomi stepped past Coulter, holding Clara tightly, Emma still bundled against her chest. She walked down the steps and stopped in front of the marshal. "If you arrest him," she said, "you're arresting the wrong man." "Mrs. Hale, I want to file a formal complaint against Richard Hale and everyone in his family who was involved in what happened to me." Richard laughed. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." Naomi turned to face him. "You tried to murder me and my daughters, and if this marshal is worth anything, he'll investigate." "There's nothing to investigate," Richard said. "Then you won't mind answering questions under oath." The marshal looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, if you want to file a complaint, you'll need to come to town. Fill out the paperwork. We'll look into it." "Fine. I'll come tomorrow." "Alone," Richard added quickly. "Without Vance." "Why?" Naomi asked. "Afraid of what I'll say if he's there?" "I'm not afraid of anything." "Then it shouldn't matter." Richard's smile vanished. "Marshal, arrest him. Now." The marshal hesitated, and in that moment Coulter saw the whole thing for what it was. Richard didn't want Naomi back. He wanted her silent. He wanted her scared. He wanted her to disappear quietly so no one would ask uncomfortable questions. But Naomi wasn't disappearing. "Marshal," Coulter said quietly, "if you arrest me, you're telling every woman in this territory that powerful men can do whatever they want, that money matters more than truth." The marshal's face darkened. "Don't put words in my mouth." "I'm just saying what it looks like." For a long moment, no one moved. The wind picked up, rattling the branches overhead. Then the marshal exhaled slowly and turned to Richard. "I'll take her complaint," he said, "and I'll look into it. But I'm not arresting Vance, not today." Richard's face went white with rage. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." He climbed back onto his horse and looked at Naomi. "Tomorrow morning, town hall, 9 o'clock. Naomi nodded. "I'll be there." The marshal rode off, and after a moment, the rest of the men followed. Richard was the last to leave, his eyes locked on Naomi. "This isn't over," he said. Naomi replied. Then he was gone, and the clearing in front of the cabin was empty again. Coulter walked down the steps and stood beside Naomi. She was shaking, but her face was set. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I did. They're going to fight you every step of the way." "Let them." Coulter looked at her, really looked at her, and realized something had changed. The frightened woman he'd found tied to a fence post was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd decided she wasn't going to be a victim anymore. "All right," he said. "Then we fight." Naomi turned to him, and for the first time since this whole thing started, she smiled. Not a small, uncertain smile, but something real. "Together," she said. "Together," Coulter agreed. And as they walked back into the cabin, Coulter realized that the storm wasn't just coming anymore. It was already here. That night, neither of them slept much. Coulter sat at the table cleaning his rifle, methodically working oil into every moving part. Naomi paced the cabin with Emma fussing against her shoulder, her footsteps wearing a path between the stove and the window. Clara had finally settled in the basket, but every small sound made Naomi's head snap toward the door. "You should rest," Coulter said without looking up. "I can't. Tomorrow's going to be long." "I know." She stopped by the window and stared out into the darkness. "What if they don't believe me?" "Some will, some won't. That's how it works." "And if it's not enough?" Coulter set down the rifle and met her eyes. "Then we figure out what's next." "There might not be a next. If the marshal sides with them, he won't." "You don't know that." "I know he didn't arrest me today when he had the chance. That means something." Naomi turned back to the window. Emma had stopped fussing and was making small, sleepy sounds against her mother's neck. "I'm scared," Naomi said quietly. "That's smart." "You're not scared?" "I'm terrified. But I learned a long time ago that being scared doesn't change what you have to do. It just makes it harder." Naomi looked at him over her shoulder. "How do you do it? Stay so calm?" "I'm not calm. I'm just good at pretending." She almost smiled at that. Then her expression shifted, became more serious. "If something happens to me tomorrow, nothing's going to happen. But if it does—" "Naomi, if it does," she continued, voice firm, "I need you to promise me something." Coulter stood up and crossed the room to stand beside her. "What?" "Promise me you'll take care of them, Clara and Emma. Don't let the Hale family get them." "That's not going to happen." "Promise me anyway." Coulter looked down at the baby sleeping against Naomi's shoulder, then at Clara curled up in the basket. Two tiny lives that had somehow become the center of everything. "I promise," he said. Naomi exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Thank you." They stood there in silence for a while, watching the darkness outside. Then Naomi said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you regret it? Any of this?" Coulter thought about that. About the moment he'd heard the crying in the snow. About carrying 3 half-frozen people through a blizzard. About every choice he'd made since then that had led them here, standing in his cabin at midnight, preparing for a fight that might destroy everything. "No," he said, "I don't. Even though it's made your life harder? My life needed to be harder. I'd spent 15 years hiding from it." Naomi turned to look at him fully. "You're a good man, Coulter Vance." "I'm just a man." "That's not true." "It is. I'm stubborn, and I'm angry, and I don't know how to talk to people anymore. The only reason I'm doing any of this is because I'm too stupid to walk away. That's not stupidity. That's courage." Coulter shook his head. "Courage is doing something even when you're scared. I'm doing this because I don't know how to do anything else." "Then what would you call it?" He was quiet for a moment. "Necessity." Naomi reached out and touched his arm. Her hand was warm, even through his shirt. "Whatever it is," she said, "I'm grateful for it." Coulter looked down at her hand, then back at her face. There was something in her eyes he hadn't seen before, something that made his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "We leave at dawn." Naomi nodded and pulled her hand back, but she held his gaze for another moment before turning away. Coulter went back to the table and picked up his rifle, but he couldn't focus on the work anymore. His mind kept circling back to the feeling of her hand on his arm and the way she'd looked at him in the darkness. He'd spent 15 years convincing himself he didn't need anyone, that solitude was safer than connection. But sitting there in the quiet cabin, listening to Naomi settle the babies and prepare for whatever tomorrow would bring, Coulter realized he'd been lying to himself. He'd needed someone all along. He just hadn't known it until now. They rode into Ridgeway as the sun crested the mountains. The town was already awake, smoke rising from chimneys, voices carrying down the main street. Coulter kept his horse close to Naomi's, his eyes scanning every alley and doorway. "Stay near me," he said. "I'm not planning on going anywhere." They tied up outside the town hall, a squat wooden building that served as courthouse, meeting place, and office for the marshal. A small crowd had already gathered on the steps. Coulter recognized some faces from the general store. Others were strangers. Word had spread fast. Naomi dismounted and adjusted the sling holding both babies. Coulter came around and offered his arm. She took it without hesitation, and together they walked toward the building. The crowd parted to let them through, but the whispers followed. "That's her. Can't believe she's showing her face. Heard she's accusing the Hales of attempted murder. Heard Vance has been keeping her prisoner." Coulter ignored all of it. He kept his eyes forward and his hand steady on Naomi's arm until they reached the door. The marshal was waiting inside. His office was small and cluttered, papers stacked on every surface, a coffee pot sitting cold on a makeshift stove. He looked tired, like he'd been up all night too. "Mrs. Hale," he said with a nod. "Mr. Vance." "Marshal." Naomi's voice was steady. "Before we start, I need to make something clear. You're filing a criminal complaint. That means everything you say will be investigated, but it also means you'll be questioned. Hard. If you're lying about any of this, there will be consequences." "I understand." "And you still want to proceed?" "Yes." The marshal pulled out a chair. "Sit down. This is going to take a while." For the next 2 hours, Naomi told her story. She started from the beginning. Her marriage to Thomas Hale, arranged by her father to settle a debt. Thomas had been kind enough at first, but distant, more interested in building his family's fortune than building a life with her. When she got pregnant, he'd been pleased, hopeful even. Then the twins were born, and everything changed. "He wanted a son," Naomi said, her voice flat. His father had wanted a son. The whole family expected a son. When I had daughters instead, it was like I'd betrayed them. The marshal was writing everything down, his pen scratching across the paper. How did Thomas react? He tried to hide his disappointment at first, but his family didn't. His father said I'd failed my duty. His brother Richard said I was worthless. They started talking about what would happen if Thomas remarried, found someone who could give him a proper heir. And Thomas? Naomi's jaw tightened. He got sick 3 weeks after the girls were born. Fever that wouldn't break. The doctor said it was pneumonia. He died in 4 days. "I'm sorry. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm telling you what happened." Naomi shifted Clara in her arms. "After Thomas died, the family blamed me, said I'd cursed him somehow, that I'd brought shame to their name. They wanted me gone, but they couldn't just throw me out. People would ask questions. So they decided to make it look like an accident." "Yes." The marshal set down his pen. "Walk me through that day. Everything you remember." Naomi's hands tightened on the baby. "Richard came to my room early in the morning, said we were going on a trip to settle some of Thomas's affairs. I believed him. I packed the girls and got into the wagon. We rode for hours, deeper and deeper into the mountains. When we finally stopped, I knew something was wrong." "What did he say?" "He said I was a burden, that the family couldn't afford to support me and 2 useless daughters. He said it would be easier for everyone if we just disappeared." The marshal's expression darkened. "And then?" "He tied my hands behind my back. I begged him not to do it. I told him the girls hadn't done anything wrong, that they were innocent. He said that was exactly the point. If they grew up, they'd be a reminder of Thomas's failure. Better to end it now." Coulter felt his hands curl into fists. He'd heard parts of this before, but never the whole story, never the details that made it real. "He left us there," Naomi continued, "just walked away. I heard the wagon leave, and I knew no one was coming back. I tried to keep the girls warm, but I couldn't do anything with my hands tied. I couldn't feed them or hold them properly. I just waited. For how long? I don't know. Hours, maybe. Cold. I thought we were going to die. And then I heard someone coming through the snow, and I thought it was Richard coming back to finish it. But it was Coulter. The marshal looked at Coulter. You found them on your property? By my fence line. North pasture. What condition were they in? Half frozen. The babies were crying. Mrs. Hale was unconscious. If I'd been an hour later, they'd all be dead. The marshal made another note. Did you see anyone else in the area? No, whoever left them was long gone. And you brought them back to your cabin. I wasn't going to leave them there. The marshal nodded slowly. Mrs. Hale, do you have anyone who can corroborate your story? Anyone who saw what happened? No, Richard made sure of that. What about the rope burns on your wrists? Naomi pulled back her sleeves again. The scars were still visible, red lines cutting across her skin. I still have the rope. Coulter cut it off me and I kept it. You have it with you? It's at the cabin. I'll need to see it. The marshal set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Hale, I believe you, I do. But believing you and proving it in court are two different things. Without witnesses or physical evidence beyond those scars, this is going to be your word against Richard Hale's. And the Hale family has resources. I know. They're going to hire lawyers. They're going to paint you as unstable. They're going to say you're making this up because you're angry about being cut off from their money. Let them say whatever they want. The truth is the truth. The marshal studied her for a long moment. You're braver than most people I've met. I'm not brave. I'm desperate. There's a difference. Is there? Before Naomi could answer, the door burst open. Richard Hale stood in the doorway, flanked by two men in expensive suits. His face was flushed, his eyes hard. This is absurd, he said. Marshal, you can't seriously be entertaining these accusations. The marshal stood up slowly. Mr. Hale, this is a closed meeting. It's a farce. That woman is lying. She has evidence. She has scars. That doesn't prove anything except that she got hurt at some point. It proves someone tied her up. It proves she was in an accident. For all we know, Vance did it himself and convinced her to blame us. Coulter took a step forward, but Naomi grabbed his arm. Don't, she said quietly. Richard's smile was cold. See? She's so terrified of him she won't even let him speak. I'm not terrified of him, Naomi said, her voice cutting through the room. I'm trying to keep him from doing something stupid, because unlike you, he actually cares about people. You don't know anything about me. I know you left me to die. I know you looked at my daughters and decided they were worthless. I know exactly what kind of man you are. Richard's expression darkened. Marshal, arrest her for slander. That's not how slander works, the marshal said dryly. Then arrest him. Richard pointed at Coulter. For kidnapping, for obstruction, for anything. I already told you I'm not arresting anyone without evidence. We have witnesses, people who saw Vance take her from our property. She wasn't on your property. She was on his. Because he dragged her there. He saved her life. Richard's face went red. If you won't do your job, I'll find someone who will. My family has connections all the way to the territorial governor. One word from us and you'll be out of a job. The marshal's jaw tightened. Get out of my office. Excuse me? You heard me? Get out, or I'll arrest you for interfering with an investigation. For a moment, Richard just stared at him. Then he turned on his heel and stormed out, his lawyers following close behind. The marshal waited until the door closed, then let out a long breath. That went well, Coulter said dryly. He's going to make this difficult. He's already made it difficult. The marshal looked at Naomi. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once we file the formal complaint, there's no going back. I'm sure. All right then. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Let's make it official. The formal complaint took another hour to complete. By the time they finished, the sun was high in the sky and the crowd outside had doubled in size. Coulter could hear them through the walls, voices rising and falling in argument. There's going to be a hearing, the marshal said as he sealed the document. Judge Carver will preside. He's fair, but he's also practical. You'll need more than your word if you want to win this. What do you suggest? Naomi asked. Find witnesses. Anyone who saw you with the Hale family before you disappeared. Anyone who heard them talk about getting rid of you. Anything that establishes a pattern. Most of the people who knew what was happening work for the Hales. Then convince them to talk. Offer them protection. Do whatever it takes. The marshal looked at Coulter. And you need to be careful. Richard's going to come at you hard. If he can discredit you, he can discredit her. Let him try. I'm serious, Vance. Stay out of fights. Don't give him any ammunition. Coulter nodded, but he could feel the anger simmering under his skin. Richard Hale wasn't just going to roll over. He was going to fight dirty, and Coulter wasn't sure how much restraint he had left. They left the marshal's office and pushed through the crowd. People shouted questions, some supportive, some hostile. Coulter kept his arm around Naomi and didn't respond to any of it. They were almost to the horses when someone grabbed Naomi's arm. It was a woman, maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her face was lined with years of hard living, but her eyes were sharp. "You're Naomi Hale?" she asked. "Yes." "I worked for your husband's family, in the kitchens." Naomi's eyes widened. "I remember you. Your name is Sarah." "That's right." Sarah glanced around nervously, then lowered her voice. "I heard what you said in there about what Richard did." "It's true. I believe you. I was in the house the night before you disappeared. I heard them talking." Coulter stepped closer. "What did they say?" Sarah looked at him, hesitated, then said, "Richard was arguing with his father. The old man wanted to just pay you off, send you away somewhere, but Richard said you'd always be a problem, that people would ask questions. He said," she swallowed hard, "he said it would be cleaner if you just disappeared. That winter takes care of problems like that." Naomi's face went pale. "Will you testify?" Coulter asked. Sarah shook her head. "I can't. They'll fire me. My husband's sick. I need the job." "The marshal can protect you." "The marshal can't protect me from everything. The Hales own half this territory. If they want to make my life hell, they will." "Please," Naomi said. "I need someone to back up my story. Without you, it's just my word against theirs." Sarah's expression twisted with guilt. "I'm sorry, I can't." She pulled her arm away and disappeared back into the crowd. Coulter watched her go, frustration burning in his chest. She knows the truth and she won't help. "She's scared," Naomi said quietly. "I don't blame her." "I do." "Coulter, if everyone's too scared to stand up to them, then nothing changes. The Hales win. You lose. And they get away with trying to murder you." Naomi didn't respond. She just held the babies tighter and walked to her horse. The ride back to the cabin was long and silent. By the time they arrived, the sun was starting to set, casting the mountains in shades of orange and red. Coulter helped Naomi down and carried the supplies inside while she fed the babies. "We need a new plan," he said once they were settled. "What kind of plan?" "We need to find someone willing to testify. Sarah won't do it, but there have to be others, servants, ranch hands, someone who saw something." "And how do we find them?" "We ask around, quietly, carefully." Naomi looked down at Clara, who was nursing sleepily. "That's going to take time." "Then we take the time." "We don't have time. The hearing's in 2 weeks." Coulter paced the length of the cabin, his mind racing. "Then we work fast." For the next 10 days, they did exactly that. Coulter rode out to neighboring ranches, talking to anyone who'd worked for the Hale family or done business with them. Most people shut down the moment he mentioned Richard's name. A few were sympathetic but unwilling to get involved. One man told him outright that testifying against the Hales was a good way to end up broke or dead. Naomi had better luck. She reached out to women she'd known during her brief marriage, people who'd been kind to her when the family wasn't watching. Slowly, carefully, she started to piece together a picture of what life had been like in that house. One woman, a seamstress named Judith, admitted she'd heard Richard call Naomi worthless. Another, a midwife who'd helped deliver the twins, said the family had been openly disappointed by their gender. A third, a young woman who'd worked in the Hale household as a maid, said she'd overheard Richard and his father discussing the problem of Naomi's continued presence. None of them would agree to testify. "They're all afraid," Naomi said one night, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "And I understand why. The Hales have power. They can ruin people. So can the truth. The truth doesn't pay bills. It doesn't keep food on the table." Coulter slammed his hand against the table, making Naomi jump. "Then what are we supposed to do, just give up?" "No, but we need to be realistic about what we're up against." "I am being realistic. The Hales tried to kill you. They need to pay for that. And they will." Eventually, eventually isn't good enough. Naomi stood up and crossed the room to stand in front of him. Coulter, I want justice as much as you do. I also want to survive. If we push too hard and lose, they'll take my daughters. They'll lock me away somewhere. And you, she reached up and touched his face. They'll find a way to destroy you too. Coulter looked down at her, his anger draining away. She was right. He knew she was right. But it didn't make it any easier. I'm not letting them win, he said quietly. Neither am I. But we have to be smart about it. He nodded, and she dropped her hand. The hearing was set for a cold Thursday morning in late February. Coulter and Naomi arrived early, the babies bundled against the freezing wind. The courtroom was packed, every bench filled with people who'd come to watch. Judge Carver was an older man with white hair and a face carved from granite. He'd been presiding over this territory for 20 years, and he had a reputation for being stern but fair. Richard Hale sat at the front with his lawyers, 3 men in expensive suits who looked like they'd never done a day of manual labor in their lives. They whispered among themselves, occasionally glancing back at Naomi with expressions that ranged from pity to contempt. The judge banged his gavel, and the room fell silent. We're here to address a complaint filed by Mrs. Naomi Hale against Mr. Richard Hale and his family, Judge Carver said. This is a preliminary hearing to determine if there's sufficient cause to move forward with a trial. Mrs. Hale, you may begin. Naomi stood up, Emma still in her arms. Her voice shook at first but grew stronger as she spoke. She told the story again, every detail, the days after Thomas's death, the family's anger, the morning Richard took her into the mountains, the cold, the fear, the certainty that she and her daughters were going to die. By the time she finished, half the courtroom was in tears. Richard's lawyer stood up, a tall man with slick back hair and a voice like oil. Mrs. Hale, he said, I'm very sorry for your loss and for the hardship you've endured, but I have to ask, do you have any proof that my client was involved in what you're describing? I have the rope he used to tie me up. May I see it? Naomi handed the rope to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Carver examined it carefully, then set it aside. This is a piece of rope, the lawyer said. It doesn't prove my client put it on you. It has his initials carved into the handle, Naomi said. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel for order. The lawyer's expression faltered. That doesn't prove anything. Anyone could have carved those initials. Why would anyone else carve Richard Hale's initials into a rope and then use it to tie me up? I don't know. Maybe you did it yourself. To what end? So I could accuse your client of attempted murder? Perhaps you were angry about being cut off from the family's money. Naomi's voice turned cold. I never wanted their money. I wanted to live. The lawyer tried a different approach. Mrs. Hale, is it true that you've been living with Mr. Coulter Vance since your disappearance? Yes. Alone, in his cabin, with no chaperone. My daughters are with me. 2 infants hardly count as chaperones. Coulter stood up. What are you implying? The judge banged his gavel. Mr. Vance, sit down. He's trying to make it sound like, I know what he's trying to do. Sit down. Coulter sat, jaw clenched. The lawyer smiled. I'm simply establishing that Mrs. Hale's living situation is unconventional. Some might say scandalous. Some might say I didn't have a choice, Naomi shot back. Your client tried to kill me. Coulter saved my life. If living with him is scandalous, then I'm guilty. But I'm alive. The lawyer opened his mouth to respond, but the judge cut him off. Enough. I've heard what I need to hear. Judge Carver looked at Richard. Mr. Hale, do you have anything to say? Richard stood up, his expression carefully neutral. Your Honor, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. My family has done nothing but try to help Mrs. Hale since my brother's death. If she feels we've wronged her, I apologize, but I categorically deny these accusations. Do you deny taking her into the mountains? I never took her anywhere. Do you deny that this rope belongs to you? Richard glanced at his lawyer, who nodded. I own many pieces of rope, Your Honor. That could be anyone's. With your initials on it. As my colleague said, anyone could have carved those. The judge stared at him for a long moment. Then he said, I'm ordering a full trial. We'll reconvene in 3 weeks to hear testimony from both sides. Until then, Mrs. Hale, you're free to remain wherever you choose. Mr. Hale, you're not to go within a mile of her or Mr. Vance's property. Is that understood?" Richard's face went red, but he nodded. "Good. Court dismissed." The gavel came down, and the room erupted in noise. Coulter stood and helped Naomi to her feet. She was shaking, but there was a fierce light in her eyes. "We did it," she whispered. "We got a trial. That's not the same as winning." "It's a start." They pushed through the crowd and out into the cold air. Coulter could feel eyes on them from every direction, could hear the whispers starting up again. But for the first time since this whole thing began, he felt like they had a chance. Richard Hale caught up with them before they reached their horses. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I know," Naomi replied. "You're going to regret this, both of you." Coulter stepped between them. "Walk away, Hale." "Or what? You'll hit me? In front of all these witnesses?" Richard smiled. "Go ahead. Give me a reason to have you arrested." Coulter's hands curled into fists, but Naomi grabbed his arm. "He's not worth it," she said. Richard's smile widened. "Listen to her, Vance. She's smarter than you." Then he turned and walked away, his lawyers trailing behind him. Coulter watched him go, every muscle in his body tense. "Let's go home," Naomi said quietly. They rode back in silence, the weight of what was coming pressing down on both of them. The trial was in 3 weeks. 3 weeks to find more evidence, 3 weeks to convince people to testify, 3 weeks to prepare for the fight of their lives. When they reached the cabin, Naomi put the babies down and turned to Coulter. "Whatever happens," she said, "thank you. For everything. It's not over yet. I know, but I needed to say it anyway." Coulter looked at her standing there in the firelight, strong and determined and so much braver than she gave herself credit for. "We're going to win," he said. "You don't know that." "I do. Because you're not giving up, and neither am I." Naomi held his gaze for a long moment. Then she crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. Coulter froze for a second, surprised. Then, slowly, he put his arms around her and held on. They stood like that for a long time, neither speaking, just holding each other in the quiet cabin while the wind howled outside and the fire crackled in the stove. And for that moment, at least, everything else fell away. When Naomi finally pulled away, her eyes were wet. "Sorry," she said, wiping at her face. "I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize." She nodded and turned back to the babies, but something had shifted between them. Coulter felt it in the air, a new kind of tension that had nothing to do with the trial or the Hale family. It settled in his chest and stayed there, heavy and unfamiliar. He didn't know what to do with it. The next morning, Margaret Rain showed up at the cabin. Coulter heard her wagon coming up the path and stepped outside with his rifle. When he saw who it was, he lowered the gun but didn't relax. "Mrs. Rain," he said. "Mr. Vance." She climbed down from the wagon with more agility than her age suggested. "I came to talk to Naomi. Is she here?" "She's inside." "Good, because what I have to say, she needs to hear." Coulter led her into the cabin. Naomi was feeding Clara by the fire, Emma sleeping in the basket beside her. She looked up when the door opened, surprise crossing her face. "Mrs. Rain." "Call me Margaret, dear. We're past formalities." The older woman pulled out a chair and sat down without waiting for an invitation. "I heard about the hearing. Heard you got your trial." "We did." "I also heard you don't have many witnesses lined up." Naomi's expression tightened. "That's true. Well, I'm here to change that." Margaret folded her hands on the table. "I'm going to testify." Coulter and Naomi exchanged a glance. "Why?" Naomi asked carefully. "Because I've lived in this territory for 43 years, and I've watched the Hale family act like they own everything and everyone in it. Thomas was decent enough, but his father and brother?" Margaret's face hardened. "They're the kind of men who think money makes them untouchable. Someone needs to tell them they're wrong." "You don't know what happened," Naomi said. "You weren't there." "No, but I know the Hales, and I know character when I see it. You're not lying about what they did. Anyone with eyes can see that." "The lawyers will tear you apart. Let them try. I've been torn apart by better men than Richard Hale's hired dogs." Margaret leaned forward. "Besides, I'm not the only one. I've been talking to people. Quietly. There are others who want to help but are too scared to come forward alone. If I testify first, they might follow. Who? Coulter asked. Sarah, for one. The woman from the kitchens. She came to me 2 days ago, guilty as sin about turning you down. Said if someone else went first, courage. Naomi's eyes widened. She did? She did. There's also a ranch hand named Peter who used to work for the Hales. He quit last year after Richard threatened to break his fingers over a fence post that went missing. He's angry enough to talk. That's not exactly relevant to attempted murder, Coulter pointed out. It establishes a pattern. Shows Richard's violent. That matters in court. Margaret looked at Naomi. I can't promise this will be enough to win, but it's more than you had yesterday. Naomi shifted Clara to her other arm, her jaw working. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. I know enough, and more importantly, I know what it's like to be a woman in a world run by men who think they can do whatever they want. If I can help stop that, even a little, I will. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Naomi said, Thank you. Margaret stood up. Don't thank me yet. Thank me after we win. She headed toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Be careful between now and the trial. The Hales are desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. We're being careful, Coulter said. Be more careful. Margaret tipped her head and left. After she was gone, Naomi looked at Coulter. Do you think she's right? That others will follow if she testifies? I don't know, but it's a chance. It's more than we had. Coulter nodded. Yeah, it is. The weeks leading up to the trial were strange. Time moved too fast and too slow at the same time. Days blurred together in a rhythm of preparation and waiting. Coulter rode out to meet with Peter, the ranch hand Margaret had mentioned. The man was younger than Coulter expected, maybe 25, with a scar running down his left cheek. Richard Hale's a bastard, Peter said bluntly when Coulter explained why he'd come. I worked for him for 2 years and he treated us like dirt. I saw him beat a horse half to death because it spooked at the wrong time. Saw him fire a man for looking at him wrong. You're telling me he tried to kill someone? I believe it. Will you testify to that? Peter hesitated. If I do, I'll never work in this territory again. The Hales will make sure of it. Maybe, or maybe people will see them for what they are and you'll come out ahead. That's a big maybe. It is. But if you don't speak up, nothing changes. Naomi loses, Richard wins, and next time he decides someone's worthless, there won't be anyone to stop him. Peter stared out at the horizon, his jaw tight. Then he said, All right, I'll do it. You sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Coulter rode back to the cabin feeling something close to hope. Meanwhile, Naomi spent her days caring for the babies and writing down every detail she could remember about her time with the Hale family. Names, dates, conversations, anything that might be useful in court. She filled pages with cramped handwriting, her hand aching by the time she finished each night. You don't have to do all this, Coulter said one evening, watching her work. Yes, I do. The lawyers are going to ask me questions I won't have time to think through. If I write it all down now, I'll be ready. You're already ready. Naomi looked up at him. I'm terrified. That's normal. Is it? You don't seem scared. I'm good at hiding it. She set down her pen. What are you scared of? Coulter thought about that. There were a lot of answers he could give. He was scared they'd lose. Scared Richard would find some way to twist the truth. Scared Naomi and the babies would be taken away, and there'd be nothing he could do to stop it. But the thing that scared him most was harder to put into words. I'm scared I won't be enough, he said finally. Naomi frowned. What do you mean? I mean, I'm one man. I've got a cabin and some cattle and a rifle. That's it. The Hales have money, power, connections. If they decide to come after me hard, I don't know if I can stop them. You've stopped them so far. So far isn't finished. Naomi stood up and crossed the room to stand in front of him. Coulter, you are enough. You've been enough since the moment you found me. Don't doubt that now. He wanted to believe her, but doubt had a way of settling in deep, and 15 years of isolation had taught him not to trust his own worth. I'll try, he said. That's all I'm asking. She reached up and touched his face, her hand warm against his skin. Coulter closed his eyes and let himself lean into the touch, just for a moment. Then Clara started crying, and the moment broke. 2 days before the trial, the marshal showed up with news. Richard Hale filed a countersuit, he said, standing in the doorway of the cabin. Coulter's stomach dropped. For what? Defamation. He's claiming Naomi's accusations are damaging his reputation, and he wants compensation. That's insane. That's the law. If she's lying, he has grounds. The marshal looked at Naomi. He's also asking the judge to remove the children from your custody pending the outcome of the trial. Naomi's face went white. He can't do that. He can try. He's arguing that you're unfit to care for them given your current situation. My situation? Living with a man you're not married to, no income, no stable home. I have a home. I have Coulter. You're not married, the marshal said gently. In the eyes of the court, that matters. Coulter felt rage rising in his chest. So what? They take the babies and give them to the people who tried to murder them? Richard's arguing they tried to murder Naomi, not the children. He's saying he'll provide a proper home, proper upbringing, everything a wealthy family can offer. He's lying, probably, but he's also playing the game smart. If he can paint Naomi as unstable and you as her accomplice, he might win custody even if he loses the criminal case. Naomi sank into a chair, her face in her hands. I can't lose them. I can't. Coulter turned to the marshal. What do we do? Honestly, you get married. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. What? Naomi looked up. If you're married, his argument falls apart. You'd have a stable home, a husband who can provide. The judge would have no grounds to remove the children. That's not a real solution, Coulter said. It's the only solution I've got. The marshal shifted uncomfortably. Look, I know it's not ideal, but unless you want to risk losing those girls, it's your best option. We can't just get married because of a lawsuit. Why not? People get married for worse reasons. Naomi stood up. Marshal, thank you for the information, but we need to discuss this privately. He nodded and left. The moment the door closed, Naomi turned to Coulter. We can't do this. Why not? Because it's insane. Marriage is supposed to be about love, not legal strategy. Is it? Coulter leaned against the wall. People have been getting married for practical reasons since the beginning of time. This isn't different. It is different. We barely know each other. We've been living together for 2 months. I know you wake up 3 times a night to check on the babies. I know you hum when you're nervous and you bite your lip when you're thinking hard about something. I know you're the bravest person I've ever met. He paused. How much more do I need to know? Naomi stared at him. That's not the point. Then what is? The point is I won't trap you into something you don't want. You saved my life. You've done more than anyone had a right to ask. But I'm not going to make you marry me because Richard Hale filed a lawsuit. What if I want to? The words were out before Coulter could stop them. Naomi blinked. What? What if I want to marry you? He pushed off the wall and took a step closer. Not because of the lawsuit, not because of the trial, because I want to. Coulter, I know this isn't how it's supposed to happen. I know I'm supposed to court you properly and ask your father's permission and do everything the right way. But we don't have time for that. And honestly, I don't care about doing it the right way. I just care about keeping you and those girls safe. Naomi's eyes were wide. You don't know what you're saying. I do. You don't love me. How do you know? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Because we haven't known each other long enough. So? My parents knew each other 3 weeks before they got married. They were happy for 30 years. Coulter took another step closer. I'm not saying I have it all figured out. I'm not saying this is going to be easy. But I know I don't want you to leave. I know I want to be there when those girls grow up. And I know that if marrying you is what it takes to keep that from happening, then that's what I'm going to do. Naomi's hands were shaking. This is crazy. I know. We could lose everything. We could, or we could win. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression torn between fear and something else, something that looked almost like hope. If we do this, she said slowly, it has to be real. I won't have a marriage that's just for show. I wouldn't ask you to. And you have to mean it. Not just now, but after the trial, after all of this is over. I mean it, Coulter said. Naomi studied his face, searching for something. Then slowly, she nodded. All right, she whispered. Let's do it. They got married the next day. There was no time for anything fancy. No white dress, no flowers, no guests beyond the marshal who served as witness, and Margaret Rain who insisted on being there. They stood in front of a tired-looking clerk in the town hall, Clara and Emma bundled between them, and said their vows in under 5 minutes. When the clerk pronounced them married, Coulter expected to feel different, changed somehow. But he just standing next to a woman who'd become the center of his entire world in the span of 2 months. "You can kiss the bride," the clerk said in a bored voice. Coulter looked at Naomi. She was staring at him with wide eyes, her cheeks flushed. "Do you want to?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said. He leaned down and kissed her. It was brief and awkward, and nothing like the romantic moments people wrote about in books. But it was real, and that was enough. When they pulled apart, Margaret was beaming. "Congratulations," she said. "Now, let's go win a trial." The trial began the following morning. The courtroom was even more packed than it had been for the hearing. People stood along the walls, crammed into every available space. Coulter recognized some faces from town. Others were strangers who'd come from neighboring territories, drawn by the scandal. Judge Carver entered and everyone stood. He took a seat behind the bench and surveyed the room with a stern expression. "This is a criminal trial," he said. "The territory is charging Richard Hale with attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Mr. Hale, how do you plead?" Richard stood up, his face blank. "Not guilty, Your Honor." "Very well. Prosecution, you may begin." The territorial prosecutor was a man named Daniel Grant, sharp-featured and sharp-minded. He'd ridden in from the capital specifically for this case, and he didn't waste time. "Your Honor, the prosecution will show that Richard Hale, motivated by greed and prejudice, orchestrated the attempted murder of his sister-in-law and her 2 infant daughters. We will present physical evidence, witness testimony, and a clear pattern of behavior that proves beyond reasonable doubt that Mr. Hale is guilty of these charges." He called Naomi to the stand first. She walked up with her head high, one hand smoothing down her dress. She looked small in the witness box, but her voice was steady when she took the oath. Grant led her through the story again. Every detail. Every moment. The courtroom was silent except for Naomi's voice and the scratch of the court reporter's pen. When she got to the part about being tied up and left in the snow, several women in the audience were openly crying. Then Richard's lawyer stood up for cross-examination. "Mrs. Vance," he said, emphasizing her new name, "you got married yesterday, is that correct?" "Yes. Very convenient timing. 1 day before the trial. We got married because Richard filed a custody suit. He was trying to take my daughters. Or perhaps you got married to make yourself seem more respectable, to cover up the fact that you've been living in sin with Mr. Vance for months. I've been living with the man who saved my life." "The man who you claim saved your life. We only have your word for that." "And the rope with Richard's initials, and the scars on my wrists, and the fact that I was found half frozen on Coulter's property, miles from anywhere." The lawyer's expression tightened. "You could have gone there yourself, looking for help or shelter, or perhaps something else." "Something else?" "It's not unheard of for a widow to seek companionship after her husband's death." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. "Counsel," Judge Carver said sharply, "unless you have evidence to support that insinuation, keep it to yourself." The lawyer inclined his head. "My apologies, Your Honor. Mrs. Vance, let's talk about your relationship with the Hale family. You've painted them as villains, but isn't it true they provided for you generously during your marriage? They gave me a roof and food. That's not generosity, that's basic decency. They took you in when you had nothing. My father sold me to settle a debt. I didn't have a choice. So you resented them. I resented being treated like property. And when you had daughters instead of a son, that resentment grew. No, my resentment grew when they called my daughters worthless. According to you, do you have any witnesses to these conversations?" Naomi's jaw tightened. "Several people heard them. Whether they'll admit it is another question." "So, no witnesses?" "Not yet." The lawyer smiled. "No further questions." Grant stood up for redirect. "Mrs. Vance, in your time living with the Hale family, did Richard ever threaten you?" "Yes, multiple times." "Can you give us an example?" 2 weeks after Thomas died, Richard came to my room. He told me I should leave quietly before they made me leave. When I asked what he meant, he said accidents happen all the time in the mountains. People disappear. "And you believed he was threatening your life?" "Yes." "Why didn't you leave?" "I had nowhere to go. No money. 2 newborn babies. I was trapped." Grant nodded. Thank you. No further questions. Naomi stepped down from the witness box and returned to her seat beside Coulter. Her hands were shaking. You did good, he whispered. It doesn't feel like it. The prosecution called Margaret Rain next. She walked up to the stand with her cane, settled into the chair, and stared down Richard's lawyer like she was daring him to challenge her. Grant asked her about her history in the territory, her reputation, her knowledge of the Hale family. I've known them for 20 years, Margaret said. They're the kind of people who think their money makes them better than everyone else. Thomas was different. He had some decency. But his father and brother, they're cut from the same cloth, mean and entitled. Did you ever witness Richard Hale behave violently? I saw him beat a man unconscious outside the saloon 3 years ago. The man had bumped into him by accident. Richard broke his nose and 2 ribs. Was he arrested? No. The man was too scared to press charges. Why? Because Richard threatened to burn down his business if he did. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Richard's lawyer stood up. Objection. Hearsay. I heard it myself, Margaret said flatly. I was standing right there. The judge nodded. Overruled. Continue. The lawyer tried to shake Margaret on cross-examination, but she didn't budge. Every answer was clear, precise, and damning. By the time she stepped down, Richard's face was red. Sarah testified next. She was nervous, her voice shaking, but she told the truth. She'd heard Richard and his father discussing getting rid of Naomi. She'd heard them say it would be cleaner if she just disappeared. Did they say how they planned to do it? Grant asked. No, but the next day Naomi was gone, and Richard came back alone. Peter testified after that. He described working for Richard, the threats, the violence, the way he treated people like they were disposable. By the time the prosecution rested, the courtroom felt heavy with tension. Then Richard's lawyer began his defense. He called Richard to the stand. Richard sat down, composed and confident, his expensive suit perfectly pressed. Mr. Hale, the lawyer said, did you attempt to murder your sister-in-law? Absolutely not. Did you take her into the mountains and abandon her? No, I never touched her. Then how do you explain her accusations? Richard sighed, like the whole thing pained him. Naomi has been unstable since Thomas's death. She was devastated, understandably. But she started saying strange things, accusing people of plotting against her. We tried to get her help, but she refused. And the rope with your initials? I have no idea where that came from. Anyone could have taken a rope from my property and carved my initials into it. Why would someone do that? To frame me. Naomi was angry about being cut off financially. This is her way of getting revenge. Grant stood up. Objection, speculation. Sustained, Richard's lawyer continued. Mr. Hale, what did you do the day Naomi disappeared? I was at my family's main property, supervising the ranch hands. I have a dozen witnesses who can confirm I never left. Thank you. No further questions. Grant stood up for cross-examination, and his expression was cold. Mr. Hale, he said, you testified that you have witnesses who can confirm you were at the main property all day. Can you name them? My foreman, several ranch hands. I'd have to get the full list. How convenient. And these ranch hands, do they work for you? Yes. So they depend on you for their livelihood, I suppose. Which means if they contradicted your story, you could fire them. I wouldn't do that. But you could. Richard's jaw tightened. Theoretically. Mr. Hale, isn't it true that you told multiple people you wanted Naomi gone? No. Sarah Mills testified that she heard you say it would be cleaner if Naomi just disappeared. Was she lying? She must have misheard. And Peter Garrett, was he lying when he said you threatened to break his fingers? That was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that left him terrified to work in this territory again. I can't control how people interpret things. Grant leaned forward. Mr. Hale, do you believe women who don't produce male heirs are worthless? Of course not. Then why did multiple witnesses hear you say exactly that about Naomi? They didn't. You're saying they're all lying or mistaken. How many people have to be mistaken before it stops being a mistake and starts being a pattern? Richard's lawyer stood up. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained. Move on, Mr. Grant. Grant nodded. No further questions. The trial continued for 3 more days, more witnesses, more arguments, more evidence piled up on both sides. But by the end, it came down to one simple question. Who was telling the truth? On the final day, both lawyers gave their closings. Richard's lawyer painted Naomi as a scorned woman seeking revenge. He called Coulter an opportunist who'd taken advantage of a vulnerable widow. He asked the jury to see through the lies and recognize that the Hale family was the real victim here. Grant stood up and spoke quietly, but every word landed like a hammer. Richard Hale is a man who believes his money makes him untouchable, he said. He looked at a woman and her 2 baby daughters and decided they were worthless. So he did what he thought no one would ever question. He tried to erase them. He tied Naomi Vance up, took her into the mountains, and left her to freeze to death. He expected winter to do the work for him. He expected no one would ever know. But someone did find her. Someone saved her. And now she's here, alive, demanding justice. You have the power to give it to her. Don't let Richard Hale's money convince you that he's above the law. Because if you do, you're telling every powerful man in this territory that he can do whatever he wants to whoever he wants, and no one will stop him. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Coulter and Naomi waited in a small room behind the courtroom, the babies sleeping in a makeshift bed someone had set up. Neither of them spoke much. There was nothing left to say. When the bailiff finally came to get them, Naomi's face was pale. "Whatever happens," she said, "thank you for everything." Coulter took her hand. "It's not over yet." They walked back into the courtroom. The jury was already seated, their faces unreadable. Judge Carver looked at the foreman. "Have you reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "What say you?" The foreman stood up. "On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty." The courtroom exploded. Coulter felt Naomi's hand tighten around his. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face. Richard's face went white. The judge banged his gavel until the room quieted. "Richard Hale, you have been found guilty of attempted murder. You will be sentenced to 15 years in prison. In addition, you are ordered to pay restitution to Mrs. Vance in the amount of $5,000. Do you have anything to say?" Richard stood up slowly. His hands were clenched at his sides, his face twisted with rage. "This is a farce," he said. "I will appeal. My family will—" "Your family has no power here," the judge interrupted. "Court is dismissed." The gavel came down one final time, and just like that, it was over. Coulter didn't remember leaving the courtroom. He remembered Naomi collapsing against him, her whole body shaking with sobs. He remembered Margaret hugging them both, her own eyes wet. He remembered the marshal shaking his hand and saying something about justice, though the words didn't stick. What he remembered most was the look on Richard Hale's face as they led him away in chains. Not remorse, not shame, just pure cold fury, like he couldn't believe the world had dared to hold him accountable. That look would stay with Coulter for a long time. They made it back to the cabin just before sunset. Naomi carried the babies inside and set them down in the basket, then stood there staring at nothing, like she didn't know what to do with herself now that it was over. "We won," she said finally. "We did. I don't know how to feel." Coulter understood that. Winning didn't erase what had happened. It didn't take away the fear or the anger or the months of uncertainty. It just meant they could stop fighting and start figuring out what came next. "You don't have to know," he said. "Not today." Naomi nodded slowly, then turned to face him. "I need to say something." "All right. When I married you, I did it because I was desperate, because I was scared of losing my daughters, and I didn't see another way. But standing there in that courtroom today, listening to you testify about why you took me in, why you protected me," she paused, her voice catching. "I realized something. I don't want this marriage to be just about survival anymore. I want it to be real." Coulter's chest tightened. "It is real. You said that before. But I need to know if you meant it. Because I'm in love with you, Coulter Vance. I don't know when it happened or how, but it did. And if you don't feel the same way, I need to know now so I can—" He kissed her. It wasn't like the awkward kiss in the town hall. This was fierce and desperate and full of every feeling he'd been trying to keep buried for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I meant it," Coulter said. "I've meant it since the day I found you." Naomi's eyes were wide. "You have?" "I didn't know what to call it back then. But yeah, I fell in love with you somewhere between carrying you through a blizzard and watching you stand up to Richard Hale in front of an entire town. You're the bravest person I've ever met, and I don't want to spend another day pretending this is just about keeping you safe." Naomi laughed, and it came out half sob. "We're idiots." "Probably. We got married before we even told each other how we felt." "We did it backwards," Coulter agreed. "But we did it." She kissed him again, softer this time, and Coulter wrapped his arms around her and held on like she might disappear if he let go. When they finally pulled apart, Emma started crying. Then Clara joined in, and the moment shattered into the familiar chaos of feeding and changing and soothing two fussy babies. But it was a good kind of chaos, the kind that meant life was moving forward. The next few weeks were strange. Coulter kept expecting something to go wrong, for Richard's family to show up with lawyers and appeals, for the whole thing to unravel. But nothing happened. Richard was in prison awaiting transfer to the territorial facility. His father, too old and too broken by his son's conviction, had retreated to the family estate and stopped making public appearances. The rest of the family seemed content to pretend Naomi had never existed, which suited her just fine. "I got a letter today," Naomi said one morning over breakfast, "from a lawyer in town." Coulter looked up from his coffee. "What kind of lawyer?" "The kind handling the restitution. Richard's family is paying the $5,000 the judge ordered. They want to settle quickly and quietly." "Smart move. Less attention that way." "The lawyer said it should arrive within the month." Naomi set the letter down. $5,000, Coulter. I've never had money like that. What do you want to do with it?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to burn it. It feels dirty somehow, like taking their money means they win." "They don't win. You do. That money's yours because a jury said what they did to you was wrong. Take it. Use it. Build something better." Naomi nodded slowly. "Maybe we could expand the cabin, add another room for the girls, fix up the barn. We could do that. Or we could buy more cattle, build up the herd." "Also an option." She smiled. "Listen to me. A few months ago, I didn't know the first thing about ranching, and now I'm planning cattle purchases." "You're a fast learner." "I have a good teacher." Coulter felt warmth spread through his chest. This was what he wanted, not just Naomi, but this life. Sitting at a table making plans, watching the babies grow, building something that would last beyond winter. For the first time in 15 years, he could see a future. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the mountains. Snow melted into rushing streams, wildflowers burst through the mud, and the air lost its bitter edge. Coulter took Naomi out to see the northern pasture, where new calves were being born almost daily. "It's beautiful," she said, watching a calf stumble after its mother on shaky legs. "It's loud and messy, and half of them will need help they won't want," Coulter said. "But yeah, it's beautiful." Naomi laughed. "You're such a romantic." "I'm practical." "You can be both." She was right, he realized. He'd spent so long thinking of himself as just a rancher, just a man doing a job, that he'd forgotten there was room for more. Room for beauty and mess, and all the complicated feelings that came with letting people into your life. They rode back to this cabin as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The babies were with Margaret, who'd insisted on watching them for the afternoon so Coulter and Naomi could have time alone. "We should do this more often," Naomi said as they unsaddled the horses. "Do what?" "This. Just be together without worrying about trials or danger or what happens next." "I'd like that." They walked into the cabin to find it empty and quiet. It felt strange not having the babies there, filling every silence with noise. "I miss them already," Naomi said. "Margaret's bringing them back in an hour." "I know, but still." Coulter pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "You're a good mother." "I'm trying to be." "You are. They're lucky to have you." Naomi looked up at him. "We're all lucky. I think about what would have happened if you hadn't found us that day, and I—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I don't know what I did to deserve you. You didn't have to do anything. You just had to be you. Even when I was half frozen and unconscious. Especially then." She laughed and buried her face in his chest. Coulter held her and thought about all the ways life could have gone differently. If he'd checked the fence line an hour later, if he'd ignored the crying, if he'd decided it wasn't worth the trouble. But he hadn't, and now everything had changed. When Margaret brought the babies back, Clara was fussing and Emma was fast asleep. Naomi took them both, settling Clara against her shoulder and swaying gently until the fussing stopped. They were perfect angels, Margaret said, though her exhausted expression suggested otherwise. Thank you for watching them, Naomi said. Anytime. Though next time I'm bringing reinforcements. Margaret looked at Coulter. I heard from the marshal today. Richard's appeal was denied. He's being transferred next week. Good. His father's selling off parts of the estate. Word is he can't afford to keep it running without Richard managing things. Guess that's what happens when you build everything on cruelty, Coulter said. Margaret nodded. The family's reputation is ruined. No one wants to do business with them anymore. Turns out people don't like associating with attempted murderers. Shocking, Naomi said dryly. Margaret smiled. You two are going to be fine, better than fine, just wait and see. After she left, Naomi put the babies down and came to sit beside Coulter at the table. Do you think she's right? She asked. About what? About us being fine. About everything working out. Coulter thought about that. The truth was, he didn't know. Life had a way of throwing problems at you when you least expected it. Money ran out, cattle got sick, winters got brutal. Nothing was guaranteed. But sitting there with Naomi beside him and the babies sleeping nearby, he realized something important. Fine didn't mean perfect. It didn't mean easy or problem-free or without struggle. It just meant you had people you loved and a place to call home and the strength to face whatever came next. Yeah, he said, I think we will be. The months that followed proved him right, though not in the way he expected. The restitution money arrived in early summer. Coulter and Naomi spent weeks debating what to do with it before finally deciding to split it. Half went into expanding the ranch, a new barn, more cattle, better equipment. The other half went into a fund for the girls' future, whatever that might look like. They should have choices, Naomi said firmly. Choices I never had. Coulter agreed. As the ranch grew, so did their lives. Tom Brewster, the neighboring rancher who'd warned them about the rumors, started coming by more often. He'd lost his wife years ago and had been struggling to keep his operation running alone. Coulter offered to help with his spring roundup, and Tom returned the favor by teaching Naomi the finer points of cattle management. You're a natural, Tom said after watching Naomi separate a calf from the herd with practiced ease. Most people take years to get comfortable around cattle. You did it in months. I had good motivation, Naomi replied, glancing at Coulter. Other ranchers followed Tom's lead. People who'd been suspicious at first started showing up with offers of help or invitations to community gatherings. The women in town, led by Margaret, made a point of including Naomi in everything from quilting circles to church socials. Not that everything was smooth. There were still whispers, still people who believed Richard's version of events or thought Naomi had manipulated her way into Coulter's life. But those voices grew quieter over time, drowned out by the evidence of what Coulter and Naomi were building together. One afternoon in late August, Coulter was fixing a section of fence when he heard riders approaching. He straightened, hand instinctively moving toward his rifle, then relaxed when he recognized the marshal. But the marshal wasn't alone. A man Coulter didn't recognize rode beside him, older and gray-haired, wearing the kind of clothes that marked him as someone important. Coulter, the marshal said with a nod. This is Judge Carver. He wanted to speak with you and Naomi. Coulter's stomach tightened. Is something wrong? Nothing's wrong, the judge said quickly. I just wanted to check in, see how you're all doing. They walked up to the cabin together. Naomi was inside with the girls, who were crawling now and getting into everything. She looked up when they entered, surprise crossing her face. Your Honor, she said, standing quickly. Please, sit, Judge Carver said. This isn't an official visit. I was passing through and wanted to see how things turned out. They sat around the table while the babies played on a blanket by the fire. The judge watched them with a soft expression. They've grown, he said. They have, Naomi agreed. They're trouble now, into everything. As they should be. The judge looked at Coulter and Naomi. I've presided over a lot of cases in my career. Most of them fade from memory after a while. But you're stuck with me, not just because of what happened, but because of what you did about it. We just told the truth, Naomi said. You did more than that. You fought back against a system designed to protect people like Richard Hale. You stood up in a courtroom and demanded justice, even when everyone told you it was impossible. And you won. He paused. Do you know how rare that is? We had help, Coulter said. Margaret, Sarah, Peter. They took risks to testify. They did, because you inspired them to. That matters more than you realize. The judge leaned back in his chair. I wanted you to know that your case has changed things. The territorial legislature is looking at new laws to protect women and children from family violence. They're talking about making it easier to prosecute wealthy defendants. It's slow work, but it's happening. Because of you. Naomi's eyes went wide. I didn't know. Most people don't. Change happens quietly. But it happens. And sometimes it starts with one person refusing to accept injustice. After the judge and marshal left, Naomi sat in silence for a long time. Are you all right? Coulter asked. I don't know. I never thought about it that way. That what we did might help other people. It did. It will. It feels strange, like we were just trying to survive, and somehow that turned into something bigger. That's how it works sometimes. You don't set out to change the world. You just set out to do what's right, and the world changes anyway. Naomi looked at him, then at the babies playing on the floor, then back at him. I love our life, she said quietly. I love this cabin and this ranch and these mountains. I love waking up next to you and watching our daughters grow. But sometimes I still can't believe this is real. That we made it through everything and came out on the other side. We didn't just make it through, Coulter said. We built something good. We did, Naomi agreed. And we're going to keep building it. 2 years passed. Clara and Emma learned to walk, then to run, their laughter filling the cabin and the yards around it. They were wildly different from each other. Clara was cautious and thoughtful, always watching before she acted. Emma was fearless and loud, diving into everything head first. Watching them grow was like watching two different versions of the future unfold at the same time. Naomi took to ranch life like she'd been born to it. She learned to rope and brand and doctor sick animals. She kept the books, managed the finances, and somehow still found time to cook meals that made the cabin smell like home. She also started helping other women in the area, offering shelter to those fleeing bad situations, connecting them with lawyers and resources. You're building a network, Margaret said one day, watching Naomi counsel a young woman who'd shown up at the cabin with a black eye and nowhere else to go. I'm just doing what someone did for me, Naomi replied. That's what I mean. You're passing it forward. Coulter watched all of this and felt something he'd almost forgotten. Pride. Not just in what they'd built, but in who Naomi was becoming. She wasn't the half-frozen woman he'd found in the snow anymore. She was stronger now, more confident, more herself. And she was his wife. That still felt surreal sometimes. One evening, after putting the girls to bed, Coulter and Naomi sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time at the end of the day when they could just be together without the noise and chaos of running a ranch and raising children. I've been thinking about something, Naomi said. What's that? I want another baby. Coulter turned to look at her. You do? I do. Clara and Emma are getting older. They need siblings. And she paused, smiling. I like being a mother. I like our family. I want to make it bigger. You're sure? I'm sure. Are you? Coulter thought about it, about what it would mean to have another child, or 2 or 3, more noise, more work, more sleepless nights, more love, more laughter, more life filling every corner of their world. Yeah, he said, I'm sure. Naomi leaned against him, and they sat there in comfortable silence, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. By the time the girls turned 3, the cabin had been expanded twice. Naomi was pregnant again, due in early spring. The ranch was thriving, with a herd twice the size it had been when Coulter lived alone. They'd hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men from town who were grateful for steady employment. Everything had changed. But the thing that struck Coulter most was how normal it all felt. There was no dramatic moment where he suddenly realized he was happy. It crept up on him slowly, in small moments. Watching Naomi sing to the girls before bed, listening to Emma's wild stories about imaginary horses, seeing Clara carefully arrange her toys in precise lines, coming inside after a long day to find dinner on the table and his family waiting for him. This was what life was supposed to be. Not perfect, not easy, but full. Real. One winter evening, 5 years after he'd first heard crying in the snow, Coulter stood on the porch and looked out at the ranch. The barn was lit up, the cattle settled for the night. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the smell of the stew Naomi was making inside. Through the window, he could see the girls playing while Naomi worked, her belly round with their third child. It was a far cry from the isolated existence he'd built after his parents died. Back then, he'd convinced himself that being alone was safer, that people only brought pain and complication. He'd spent 15 years hiding from life, calling it survival. Then 3 strangers had crashed into his world, and everything he'd believed was proven wrong. The cabin door opened and Naomi stepped out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cold. "You've been out here a while," she said, just thinking. "About what?" Coulter looked at her, this woman who'd been left to die and had somehow survived to build a life that was bigger and better than anyone expected. "About how lucky I am," he said. Naomi smiled. "We both are." She took his hand and they stood there together, watching the stars come out over the mountains. Inside, the girls were arguing about something, their voices high and indignant. Naomi laughed. "I should probably go referee that." "Probably." But she didn't move right away. Instead, she turned to face him, her expression serious. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Finding us that day? Your life would have been so much simpler if you just kept writing." Coulter thought about that question. He thought about the silence that used to fill his days, the emptiness that he'd mistaken for peace. He thought about waking up alone every morning with nothing to look forward to except more of the same. Then he thought about the sound of his daughters laughing, the warmth of Naomi's hand in his, the knowledge that he was part of something larger than himself. "No," he said firmly, "I don't regret it. Not for a second. Even when the girls are screaming and the cattle are sick and everything feels like it's falling apart? Especially then, because at least I'm not alone anymore." Naomi's eyes softened. "You were never meant to be alone, Coulter Vance." "I know that now." She kissed him, then pulled back with a grin. "Come on. Those girls need their father before they destroy the cabin." They went inside together, into the warmth and noise and beautiful chaos of their life. Years continued to pass, and the ranch became something more than just a place to work. It became a refuge. Women fleeing bad situations knew they could find shelter there. Young men looking for honest work knew Coulter would give them a fair shake. Neighbors knew that if they needed help, the Vances would show up. The community that had once whispered about them now looked to them as an example of what was possible when you refused to accept injustice. Clara grew up thoughtful and kind, with a head for numbers that made her invaluable at managing the ranch's finances. Emma became a natural with horses, fearless and intuitive. Their younger siblings, 2 boys and another girl, each found their own path. And through it all, Coulter and Naomi held the center. Their marriage wasn't perfect. They fought sometimes, usually about money or how to discipline the kids or whether to expand the herd or save for harder times. But they always worked through it because they'd learned early on that walking away wasn't an option. They'd chosen each other, and they chose each other again every day. On their 10th anniversary, Coulter took Naomi back to the place where he'd found her. The fence post had been replaced years ago, but he knew the spot. They stood there in the snow, their breath fogging in the cold air. "Do you remember what you were thinking that day?" Naomi asked. "When you first heard us crying?" "I thought I was losing my mind," Coulter admitted. "Babies crying in the middle of nowhere. It didn't make sense." "And when you found us?" "I thought you were dead. All 3 of you." He paused. "When I felt your pulse, I didn't even think about what I was doing. I just knew I had to get you warm. You saved our lives. You gave mine meaning." Naomi leaned against him. "We saved each other." She was right. That was the truth of it. Not that he'd rescued her or that she'd needed him, but that they'd found each other at a moment when both of them desperately needed saving. And together, they'd built something neither of them could have created alone. As they stood there in the snow, Coulter thought about all the years that had passed since that frozen morning. He thought about the fear and the anger and the long fight for justice. He thought about the joy and the laughter and the ordinary days that had stitched themselves into a life. Most of all, he thought about the lesson buried in all of it, the thing he wished he'd understood 15 years earlier when he'd first retreated into isolation. Survival wasn't enough. Not really. You could survive for decades and never actually live. But when you opened yourself up to people, when you let them into your life despite the risk and the pain and the complications, that was when living actually started. It didn't guarantee happiness. It didn't make everything easy, but it made everything real. And real was better than safe. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, their 5 children waiting inside. The ranch stretched out around them, a testament to hard work and stubbornness and the kind of love that refused to quit even when the world said it should. Coulter Vance had spent 15 years believing he was meant to be alone. That loss and grief had broken something in him that couldn't be fixed, that the best he could hope for was to survive until survival didn't matter anymore. But he'd been wrong. The crying he'd heard in the snow hadn't destroyed his life. It had cracked open the walls he'd built and forced him to step back into the world. The abandoned widow he'd rescued had become his partner, his equal, his reason for waking up every day. And the unwanted babies he'd carried through a blizzard had grown into daughters who reminded him every single day why life was worth living. Years from now, when people asked how it all started, Coulter would tell them the simple truth. He heard crying in the wilderness on a day when he almost didn't go out. He found 3 people who'd been left to die, and instead of walking away, he made a choice. That choice changed everything. Not because it was heroic or dramatic, or because he knew what he was doing, but because sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to accept that cruelty should go unanswered, that people are disposable, that some lives matter more than others. The world tried to tell Naomi and her daughters that they were worthless, that they should disappear quietly into the cold and make everyone's lives easier. But Coulter Vance heard them crying, and he decided the world was wrong. And in the end, that decision didn't just save 3 lives. It redeemed his own. Standing on his porch that night, with his wife beside him and his children's laughter echoing from inside the cabin, Coulter finally understood what his parents had tried to teach him all those years ago. Life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about finding people worth hurting for, worth fighting for, worth building something with even when the odds say you'll fail. The mountains stretched out before him, dark and silent and eternal. But inside his cabin, there was light and warmth and noise and love. And Coulter Vance, who'd spent 15 years lost in the wilderness, finally knew he was home.